Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now we're in southern Arizona, and today we're going to head out into the wilderness to look for two nearly forgotten ghost towns. One of which was so spooky, the Army bombed it. Well, that's not really why they bombed it, but they did bomb it. But anyways, join us as we go search for the ghost towns of Millville and Charleston, Arizona. Currently, we're on the San Pedro River, about 9 miles southwest of Tombstone, which may be the most notorious town of the Old West. This is the Old Charleston Bridge, built between 1913 and 1927. The bridge looks pretty narrow, but it was built for wagons and cars, but obviously not for modern traffic. Years ago, a truck tried to cross this and collapsed part of it. This bridge doesn't go anywhere now. It kind of just dead ends at the other end of it. You can see the modern bridge off to our right. I'm just walking across the bridge to kind of take a look at it. We'll need to actually head up the San Pedro River to get where we're going today. There's also a monument for the Battle of Bulls here. It sounds like a great name for an epic battle, but this battle was between the Mormon battalion and actual wild bulls. In December 1846, a number of wild bulls charged the Mormon battalion as they camped here on their way to California, and 3 of the group were injured, along with 3 of their mules killed. It's said that a number of bulls were killed as well. Okay, so we're on our way to the ghost towns of Millville and Charleston. This trail should get us to Millville, but there is no official trail to Charleston. The story of Millville and Charleston starts with Tombstone. In 1877, Ed Shefflin was prospecting in the hills near the San Pedro River when he found pieces of silver ore in a dry wash. After several more months, he found the source of the silver. When he filed his mining claim on September 21st, 1877, he named his stake Tombstone. A lot of the same names that show up in some of the Old West stories about Tombstone also show up in the 2 towns we're going to be visiting today. We've reached some ruins already, but we're still a little ways from the town site, so I believe this site is from the railroad days. The Arizona and Southeastern Railroad came through here starting in 1888, but that was after these towns were pretty much dead. The railroad was built to transport copper from Bisbee, Arizona. I'm not sure if there was an actual station here or if this was just a siding, but this building was definitely for the railroad. You could see where the tracks were just a few feet away from here. As I mentioned, the railroad came through here starting in 1888, and we'll get into the history and the demise of the towns as we go through them. But as we'll find out, there wouldn't have been much reason to stop here by 1888, so that's why I'm not sure if there would have been a station here, but this building does look pretty big just to be a siding, so there may have actually been a station right here. If I could find more information later, I'll put something on the screen right now. Or maybe someone who knows more about Arizona Railroad history could let me know in the comments if there was an actual station here. I tried to look on my phone, but there isn't great service here, unfortunately. The railroad stopped running through here in the late 1900s, and the tracks were removed in 2007. It hasn't been converted to a trail because there's still some hope a rail line could be reactivated, though that does seem unlikely. It looks like there could have possibly been a water tower right here. We're back on trail to the town. So with Shefflin's discovery of ore in the Tombstone area, a milling operation was needed in order to turn the raw silver ore into silver bullion. Ed, his brother Al, and their partner Richard Gird established a 10-stamp mill near here in June 1879, and ore was hauled 9 miles by mule train to the mill. By 1880, the Corbin Mill and Mining Company opened a second mill. This was the town of Millville. We're about to head into this wash, and by taking a look at some of the trees in here, definitely some powerful flooding comes through here from time to time. Crossing the wash, we've kind of lost sight of the trail. I don't think this is the trail that we were on, if this is even a trail at all. I think we should be more to the right. As we head through the brush here, I should mention that Charleston, which had probably the undeserved reputation for being tougher and livelier than Tombstone, is located somewhere out in the brush on the other side of the river. There are no official trails to that town site, and I'm not exactly sure how we'll get over there yet, but really that's a problem for future Steve. Current Steve is getting stabbed by the brush over here. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but every single one of these bushes is just covered in thorns. But here we go, we refound the trail. So it looks like we need to head to the right, but I definitely want to check out these petroglyphs before we leave too. So I will head back down there. And we can already see where the sides of the hills were carved into for the mills. The reason the mills were constructed here was due to lack of water in the Tombstone area. Water is needed for refinement of the ore, so mills were built along the San Pedro River. At the height of Tombstone's mining days, 6 mills were operating along the San Pedro River. Here's a picture of the Corbin Mill in the 1880s. But this is what the site looks like today. There are the ruins of a small building over here. And there's a lot of metal on the ground everywhere around here. Most of this was probably from roofing or sides of the buildings. And as we'll see, what's left of the buildings we'll see in Millville are made of stone, while what's left of the buildings in Charleston are made of adobe. You kind of have to watch where you step out here. There are nails everywhere. Here's one right here. And you can tell this is old by the nail head. But you definitely don't want one of these rusty old nails going through your shoe. A rare piece of wood out here. Most of the wood from these buildings was salvaged or used for firewood over a century ago. I'm not sure what this building would have been, but we're very close to the Corbin Mill, so it probably has something to do with that. It's always kind of crazy to think about it, but this was an actual town. There were hundreds of people living out here, working here, and after just a short period of time, these places were completely abandoned. The Corbin Mill would have been right above us. At their peak from 1881 to 1882, These mills processed almost 1.4 million in silver bullion. These stamp mills ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As I mentioned earlier, most of the people lived across the river in Charleston, but can you imagine the noise and the filth from the smelters from these mills? It must have been inescapable. And speaking of Charleston, it's out in this direction somewhere. There used to be a bridge that linked the two towns, but it's long gone. There's a lot of metal cans and stuff here. This looks more like a trash dump. This doesn't look to be parts of any roofing or anything like that. This is where Richard Gird's house was, and the mill that was run by the Shefflin brothers and Gird would have been right around the corner here. And that mill would have been right over here. You can see what's left of the brick wall. We're now walking around where the large house that Richard Gird built once stood. Aside from the noise and filth from the mills, one of the main reasons people chose to live in Charleston rather than Millville is because Richard Gird didn't allow alcohol in Millville, while alcohol was plentiful in Charleston. And that's also why Millville doesn't have the reputation that Charleston did. This is where people worked. Charleston was where they let loose. Pretty much everywhere you look, you come across more ruins for buildings. For a few years, they had a pretty substantial operation out here. Millville did briefly have a post office. It opened on May 26, 1879, but it shut down less than a year later on May 3rd, 1880, since there was already a post office in Charleston, and it wasn't necessary to have two so close by. And I'm going to head over to get a closer look at the ruins of the Corbin Mill. They kind of look like a medieval castle or something. There are bricks everywhere. Something was right here. The reason they build stamp mills on the sides of hills is because it's necessary to tier them on a downhill slope. Each part of the process takes place on a lower level. So the ore gets crushed at the top and kind of gets separated, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it's refined into the bullion. These mills were only in operation for a short time. The silver mines in Tombstone flooded in 1886, and the mills were forced to shut down, and both Charleston and Millville went into steep decline. And if the flooding wasn't enough, on May 3rd, 1887, there was a large earthquake that was accompanied by more than 30 minutes of aftershocks that devastated both Charleston and Millville. By 1889, only a decade after they were founded, both towns were already ghost towns. And yeah, the ruins from this mill look like something out of Game of Thrones. See the wall up above us? Still quite a few bricks left here. We're on top of the mill site now, and there's a bit of a depression here. I've been looking around just in case they dropped some silver as they were leaving, but so far no luck. Over here we can get an idea how thick the rock wall is. This mill was actually delayed in opening by about a year because they had to blast the side of this hill. I also don't know how stable this rock wall currently is, so I'm not going to get too close to the edge here. Oh, check this out. It looks like what's left of the sluice that would have brought the crushed ore down to the next level. And as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of just mind-boggling how quiet and empty it is out here now. But 140 years ago, there would have been so much noise and hundreds of people walking around, and a whole other town across the river where those trees are. Before we try to head over to Charleston, I do want to check out those petroglyphs. According to a sign, these are believed to be Hohokam petroglyphs, so these date back to at least the 1400s, because that's when the Hohokam culture disappeared. Because the San Pedro River is between us, there's no trail, and the bridge has been gone for over 100 years, now we have to figure out how to get over to Charleston. Rather than bushwhack through a bunch of brush, I figured it'd be easiest to head back to this wash, take it to the river, find a way to cross, and then worry about finding Charleston. Charleston was actually fairly big. A man named Amos Stowe claimed the land that would become Charleston on October 28, 1878, and immediately started planning the town. The town was laid out in a grid with 26 blocks containing 16 lots each. Stowe's attractive leasing system drew businesses to Charleston, and by May 1879, the town had approximately 40 buildings. By 1880, the United States Census recorded the population of the town as 350 people, and the permanent population likely peaked at over 400 a few years later during the height of Tombstone's silver boom. Well, if anyone's missing a car, I may have found it. It looks like it may have been here for a while, though. It goes without saying, there are no current roads to Charleston. It looks like we're going to cross under the old railroad bed. And some deer ran by as we approached the tunnel, so hopefully they'll still be there when we get to the other side. By 1880, multiple stage lines served Charleston. And let's see if we could see those deer. Yeah, there they are. I know there's no way they're coming out in the camera right now, but I'll zoom in. Okay, so we have to cross the river, and our choices are these conveniently placed pile of logs, or it looks like it gets pretty narrow down here. So we took the logs, and here's a look back at the tunnel. And down this way, there's a place called Graveyard Gulch, which doesn't sound spooky at all. Speaking of spooky, when I started the video, I mentioned that the Army bombed Charleston. Well, technically, I should have said they assaulted Charleston. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. First, we actually have to find Charleston. I had mentioned how big Charleston was. It had 4 restaurants, 4 saloons, 5 stores, 2 butcher shops, 2 bakeries, 2 blacksmiths, 2 Chinese laundries, a hotel, a lawyer, a doctor, a drugstore, a brewery, a barbershop, and even a watchmaker. The saloons in town served the mill workers, miners, and soldiers from Camp Huachuca who would come for the whiskey, gambling, and prostitution. One of the saloons in town was even owned by noted outlaw Frank Stillwell, who was suspected of killing Morgan Earp, and was later killed by Wyatt Earp in 1882. The town also had a school, and the Army even placed its telegraph office in Charleston. But the one thing it didn't have was a bank. We should be just about at the town, and it looks like there's a sign on the tree up ahead. And it looks like we found it. 1880, population 412, now 0. Hidden in the trees over here are the remains of one of the buildings. It's kind of hard to imagine, but right now we are firmly within the town limits. Mother Nature has been really doing a great job of retaking this place. We moved around to the other side of the building, and where I'm standing now was once a street. My guess is either Pioneer or Stowe Street based on the old map. Let's see what kind of view they had from this place. Now that we've gone a little further in, there are ruins all around us now. Pretty much everywhere you look, there are adobe buildings hidden amongst the trees. And this looks like it was definitely another street right here. A few places online claim that the town was named Charleston after the first postmaster, Charles Handy, but the town was actually named Charleston after Charleston, South Carolina. And I wish I knew what some of these buildings once were, but earthquakes, the United States Army, and over 130 years of time have made the town map pretty much useless. Take a look at just how thick this adobe wall is. This town wasn't here very long, but some of these buildings were built to last. I doubt there will be this much left of my house in 140 years. I had mentioned that this town had somewhat of a wild reputation. Well, the Clanton Ranch, which was owned by Old Man Clanton, the same Clantons from the gunfight at the OK Corral fame, was just a few miles from here. Some of the most infamous figures in the territory at the time were employed by or associated with the Clanton Ranch, including the Clantons themselves, Johnny Ringo, Curly Bill Brocious, Pete Spence, and Frank and Tom McLaury. Still, overall, this place was fairly small. Thousands of people lived in Tombstone, so that's where the real action was. At some point, this wall fell down, but the other side of the building still remains. This house had a pretty good view, though I don't know if any realtor would want to state that it overlooks a place called Graveyard Gulch. This tree was probably alive and well during the town's heyday. One of the most famous characters from Charleston's heyday was the Justice of the Peace, James Burnett. Burnett was, by all accounts, corrupt, and he was said to administer justice on the spot, outside of his courtroom, in the form of fines that he personally pocketed. He was pretty much the de facto dictator of Charleston until the town was abandoned. Burnett would meet his end in 1897 when he was shot and killed in Tombstone by a local rancher named William Green, who believed that Burnett blew up a dam, which led to the death of Green's daughter. There's no surviving evidence that Burnett was actually responsible for the dam, but apparently these two hated each other for years. So the mines in Tombstone flooded and the mills shut down. Then there was the large earthquake which destroyed a lot of the buildings here in town. The post office closed on October 24th, 1888, and by 1889, this place was a ghost town. In the early 1890s, the town was briefly inhabited again by Mexican immigrants, and they pretty much dismantled the remaining wooden structures, using most of the wood for firewood. After that, this place sat abandoned and pretty much untouched for about 50 years, until World War II broke out. In 1943, soldiers from Fort Huachuca used Charleston to train for urban combat, calling it Little Tunisia, as the adobe walls here were said to resemble Tunisia in Africa. Both infantry and artillery training was conducted here, further destroying what was left of the town. We can't see it because of the brush, but Millville is in this direction. Charleston definitely shows that it's amazing what Mother Nature can do, given 140 years of time. So that's our look at the ghost towns of Millville and Charleston, Arizona. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.